So before we jump into looking at the curriculum materials, I just wanted to give us a little bit of an overview of what that process looks like to select material to recommend for adoption. So we actually just completed a 2-year selection process, and you can see some of the key highlights of that process here on the slide. But we started this 2 years ago with a committee of teachers representing schools all across our city to review multiple curriculum programs and select 2 that they wanted to pilot this current school year. So this current school year, we piloted CPM and Illustrative Mathematics, or IM. And at the end of that process, teachers unanimously voted to recommend IM for adoption for Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2. So it's pretty exciting that we have this opportunity to have the same curriculum for middle school and high school, since middle school also adopted IM 2 years ago. If you want to see any more details around some of the communication or a detailed timeline of that process, those links are for you there on this slide. So as the pilot committee was considering the different curriculum programs that we were looking at, here are some of the strengths of the IM curriculum that teachers named. So first and foremost, teachers were really wanting to make sure that whatever curriculum program we'd picked, we were having opportunities to engage students with really Common Core aligned rigorous tasks. So one of the things that teachers called out with IM is that the curriculum provided a really nice balance of mathematical rigor, so meaning it attended equally to procedural fluency, conceptual understanding, and application. Teachers also really appreciated the unit design and lesson design of the curriculum, and we'll be getting into that in a little bit, but they really appreciated the predictable daily structure that supported both their own planning as a teacher and also supported students in their learning journey. The curriculum also has a lot of routines and structures embedded into the teacher notes and the lesson activities that support our English learners and other diverse learning populations. And then one of the most important things that teachers were looking at was the usability for both students and teachers. So teachers really appreciated the teacher notes and the way that the teacher notes supported them to make sense of both the mathematical content and also how you engage students in the mathematics. And then for students, students shared a lot of feedback with teachers as well, that they appreciated the workbooks that came with the curriculum, and they found that as a useful tool for organizing their thinking. So now I'm going to go over just an overview of the curriculum design and pedagogy. And so as I'm going over these slides, just be thinking to yourself, how does this connect to curriculum that you're currently using or curriculum that you hope to try moving forward? And then as Joey's named, please feel free to continue to drop questions into the chat box that we'll get to in a moment. So here on this slide, we can see the overarching design structure of IM. And this is the design structure that drives all of the material that we see in their curriculum program. So there's this idea of starting with an invitation to the mathematics, helping kids get into the math through either a familiar context or drawing upon prior knowledge, similar to the which one doesn't belong task that Mary started us off with this morning. And then we move into a deep study of concepts and procedures. And then we move into consolidating and applying those knowledge and concepts that we worked with. So this is the typical structure of a lesson for IM. So all the IM lessons start with a warm-up. So it could be a which one doesn't belong, could be a notice and wonder, it could be a number talk, or it could just be another kind of question to get kids' brains warmed up and thinking about prior knowledge. From there, we move into an activity and an activity synthesis. So in a given lesson, there might be 2 activities or 3 activities in a given lesson. And then at the end of every lesson, there's a moment for a lesson synthesis. So this might be done through a classroom discussion, students sharing their work with each other, some kind of way for students and teacher to synthesize the mathematics that happened during that lesson. And then every lesson has a cool down. So we kind of think of this as a daily formative assessment or an exit ticket that can be used at the end of the lesson. So when we come back to thinking about the overarching design structure, we see that this invitation to the math, deep study of concepts and procedures, and consolidating and applying really plays out at every level of the design of the curriculum. So at the unit level, there often is a short lesson series at the beginning of the unit to really draw kids into the unit. And then you've got the meat of the unit with the new learning. And then at the end of the unit is a culminating lesson where kids are putting it all together. We see this same structure at the lesson level with the warm-up as the invitation to the math, the classroom activities where kids are really making sense of new learning, and then they get a chance to synthesize their understandings at the end of the lesson and show that with the cool down. And then we also see that showing up at the activity level too within a lesson. Here we have the units by course. So this is the sequence of units in IM. In bold are the units that our pilot cohort piloted last year or this year. And then with Algebra 1, there are some extra support materials that accompany those Algebra 1 lessons. And I'll be sharing a little bit more about that in a moment. But I'm going to pause here and just let you guys take a moment to take a look at this slide and just for yourself do a notice and wonder. What do you notice about how the units are sequenced within the courses and across the courses? And if you have any wonderings, feel free to jot those in the chat box. So I'll go ahead and pause for 1 minute. All right.
Courtney, maybe before we continue, it looks like there are a couple questions. So there's one question about whether the curriculum was designed with a traditional schedule in mind versus a block schedule.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the lessons were designed with a traditional 50-minute lesson block in mind. However, IM has also put out some recommendations for how to modify that for a block schedule. Are there any other questions we can attend to now before moving on?
I can speak to just implementing it during the pilot. It was tough to get through everything, including the cool down in the 50 minutes. In the block period, it was really easy, as well as adding some practice problems.
Great, thanks, Shane. All right, I'm noticing that some teachers have dropped in some noticings around when particular concepts are taught. So trig functions are taught at the end. Algebra 1 has 2 units with statistics. Great. So as you're noticing other things or wondering other things, feel free to drop those in the chat. So earlier I spoke some of the strengths of the IM curriculum that teachers called out were the various supports that are provided for our students with diverse learning needs. So a lot of the curriculum is designed with the universal design for learning principles in mind. So some of the activities will have these ideas already embedded into the activities, and some of them will have some specific strategies called out to support students with disabilities. We also have a lot of English language learners in Oakland, so this was really important to us to select a curriculum that really provided some guidance around how to support our English language learners to both develop their mathematics, but also their language. So embedded into the curriculum are math language routines, so that's abbreviated as MLR. So these 8 math language routines were developed alongside the curriculum with Jeff Swears and his group down at Stanford. And so some of these language routines you'll notice might be familiar, like 3 reads, and some of them might be newer, but these language routines are structures that really provide an opportunity for kids to not just deepen their understanding of mathematics, but also amplify the language that is needed. Also part of this curriculum is a full Algebra 1 support curriculum. So this is designed for students who are taking an Algebra 1 support class alongside their Algebra 1 class. There is an activity that goes along with every single Algebra 1 lesson. So for those schools who are offering an Algebra 1 support class, we are able to support you with workbooks for the support class as well. And then here's just another summary of some of the purposeful design features that are in the curriculum. Teachers in the pilot really called out the problem-based structure of the curriculum. So it really feels in line with our OUSD vision for mathematics, where we're really working to support students to become owners of their mathematics, communicators, collaborators, problem solvers. And so this curriculum really nurtures that kind of vision where teacher is a facilitator and really lifting up student ideas to drive discussion and to help kids further their understandings. Hopefully you'll get a chance to dig into the website on your own time, but here's just a quick snapshot of some of the things that are available in the lesson plan. And Mary's gonna go over some of these features as well in a moment. But there's a lot in the teacher notes to support teachers in making sense of a lesson plan, including student materials in both PDF form and Word document form. And our publisher has also made it really easy to put all of the documents into Google Classroom, which is super helpful right now with distance learning. And then you can see some of the other features of a lesson plan listed here. All right, with that, I'm gonna go ahead and pause. Joey, are there any questions coming up that feel important to answer right now?
Yeah, so there was a question in the chat box about is the workbook for the support class? And I don't know if that means, is it for the support class or is there a separate workbook? But I think that's one that we haven't answered before.
Great question. Yeah, there are separate workbooks for the Algebra 1 support class. So if a student is enrolled in Algebra 1 support, they will also be enrolled in Algebra 1, so they'll have their workbook for their Algebra 1 course, but they'll also have a separate smaller workbook for their Algebra 1 support class.
And then Courtney, there was another question about how well IM could transfer to distance learning, thinking about this year and perhaps next year. That might be a better question for us to address after we do some more digging into the online materials, but just putting it out there.
Yeah, great, thank you. Yes, let's definitely hold that one for the next piece. Thanks, Joey. Okay, I'm gonna pass it back to Mary.
All right, we're gonna dig into the materials a little bit, and I know that this can be a little challenging if you don't have them in front of you because you probably just want to explore. But remember, these slides are going to be accessible to you after the fact, and we're definitely can answer questions later on as well. So here we go. All right, I'm not actually going to be in the slides for too long because I'm actually going to go through the website, but I have screenshots in the slides for you to reference on your own time. When I click in here, it's going to bring us to the website. And I'm going to try to make this, is that actually making it bigger for you all? Okay. You'll notice this has changed to Google Classroom. This is where the place would be to make an account if you have not already done so. Now everything is integrated or can be integrated into Google Classroom, which has been helpful during this distance learning time. Down here is where we're going to actually launch the curriculum. And this is where you would have any, or you'd see any of the supports that are available for students, families, and educators. For students, the whole workbook is also available online, as well as like the learning targets and goals. For families, there are some materials for each unit that kind of shows you the big idea of the unit so that they're able to support. And then this is the big section for teachers and educators, is where you're gonna actually access any of the curriculum. Below are additional resources, some of which Courtney's already talked through around curriculum design, unit design, and some supports for diverse learners, as well as all of the assessments. Okay. I'm gonna pause for a second. Joey, is there anything that we need to address before I move on?
I don't think so yet.
Okay, great. So I'm actually gonna pull up one of the units now, just so that we can look at it together. So if I go into Algebra 1, let's look at Unit 2. And this would be the kind of overall view of the unit. So at the top here, we see what the unit is focused on and the big ideas. Under lessons, all of the different lessons, which are grouped into lesson series. And then we have a spot for resources where anything that's needs to be downloaded or that you would like to download is available, including these black line masters, which are with the materials like a card sort or something like that that you might need for your students. And there's also the assessments. We have the check for readiness before the unit starts, mid-unit assessment, and end-of-unit assessment. So that's all at the unit level. I'm gonna pause for about 2 minutes right now and give you time if you want to create an account and explore on your own. And then I'm gonna actually go into at the lesson level, okay? So this is gonna be sort of an awkward 2-minute silence.
Mary, might it make sense to stop sharing the screen for those 2 minutes so some folks get easier access to going to IM?
Sure, that's a great idea. There we go.
And I
was late to the meeting. How do I get to IM?
I was just about to say, I just put the link in the chat box. So if you open the chat box, it's im.kendallhunt.com.
Thank you.
I'm gonna give folks about 1 more minute, and I know that that's not enough time to fully explore, but just so that you can have it up, and then we're gonna dig into a lesson. Okay, I'm gonna invite us all back. I'm gonna pause again after I go through a lesson, which will be another opportunity for you to kind of play around on your own in case that helps you formulate any questions. I'm gonna share screen again. Okay. So now we've kind of seen what's available at the unit level. I'm going to dig into lesson 1. And you'll see that there's kind of 3 different buckets again for each lesson. So this first one around preparation is where all the prep stuff is that you might want to read through before you teach a lesson. There's a lesson narrative about what the lesson's about. Learning goals that are divided into teacher-facing and student-facing. And anything in green is what students would actually see in their online version or in their workbook. Common Core state standards, they have building on, so it lets you see where this unit, where some like prior knowledge might be stemming from, and then what standards it's addressing during the lesson. The glossary, and then any sort of materials that you might want to download. There's also quick, easy access to get to the student lesson in case you wanted to see what that looks like. The second bucket is around, is the actual lesson itself. And as Courtney described earlier, kind of the flow of the lesson are different activities, and you'll see that each activity is like point 1, point 2, point 3. This first one is the warm-up with some guidance on how you might launch it, as well as what students would see in their workbook or in the online feature. Some examples of what student response might look like, and then those activity synthesis that Courtney mentioned, so that each section of the lesson has a synthesis, as well as at the very end, if I scroll all the way down to this lesson, at the end, it has an actual lesson synthesis, which is some guidance on how you might close that lesson. I'm going to quickly talk about this third bucket, and then I'm going to pause again for people to explore on their own. In this practice section, these are just it's mostly green because it's what students would be seeing, but it also has the solution key. Okay, so I'm going to once again stop sharing and give us a few minutes to play it on your own, and then we're going to address any questions that are coming up in this section. Okay, so go ahead and explore for the next 2 minutes. About 30 more seconds to explore. Make sure if questions are coming up, you're capturing those in the chat box now. All right, so Joey, again, thank you for kind of monitoring the chat box and the questions coming up. Is there anything that we should dig into during this section, or that we should wait until the question and answer session at the end?
So I think you addressed this briefly, Mary, but there's someone who's asking about diagnostic tests. Would you maybe just show the assessments again so folks can see the check your readiness?
Sure. Let me share the screen. Yep. Sorry, I'm actually at the lesson level. And I went all the way back to the beginning. Okay, so within a unit, there's the check for readiness assessments, which is like a diagnostic for that unit. We can also access them from this bank down here, where there's diagnostic assessments. And it kind of gives some guidance on how those are used. Sorry, does that answer the question, or does anyone else want to chime in?
I'll just share a little bit. So those ready to learn diagnostic assessments, those check your readiness assessments, are really designed for that just-in-time support. So some of the skills that students would be assessed on might be things from previous units within that course, or it might draw upon skills from previous courses.
Thank you, Courtney. Other questions coming up, Joey, that should be surfaced in this section?
Not yet, no.
All right. Well, in that case, we're going to go ahead and move on, and I'm going to pass it to Courtney for talking about using curriculum with integrity.
Great, thank you. So the biggest question that I've been getting from teachers is, what does it really mean to have core curriculum and be using common curriculum across our schools? So I wanted to spend a little bit of time sharing with you all how we're thinking about that. So as you'll notice, we consider this as using curriculum with integrity. So we certainly do not want to be the curriculum police. This is not about everyone teaching absolutely the same thing every day. We trust teachers as professionals. We know that you know your students best, and you have a lot of creativity and innovation and ideas that you want to bring into your space, and we want to make sure that you feel you have the space to do that. So as we think about using curriculum with integrity, we think about the benefits of all of our students in Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2, regardless of the school that they're at, receiving an equitable opportunity to learning experiences. So part of that means using the scope and sequence recommended by IM to plan your course. So the scope and sequence is provided in those teacher notes, and when we have our curriculum trainings at the end of May and in the summer, we will help you find that spot. You can always reach out to us if you would like to look at that sooner. So being on the same scope and sequence provides opportunities for greater collaboration between teachers within your site or across sites who are teaching the same course. This also helps with our students who may be transient and are transferring between schools. We also ask that you are taking advantage of the formative assessment opportunities that are embedded within the curriculum. So we have those daily lesson cooldowns that serve as that daily formative assessment check. There are the end of unit assessments at the end of each unit. Many of the units also have a mid-unit assessment. That is an opportunity to check understanding along the way. We also know that many of you have a lot of other tasks or projects that you might be using as well as formative assessment or as an opportunity to do an expert task with students. Please feel free to continue to bring those into your instruction. We ask that you're engaging students with the key instructional strategies that we have in Oakland for students K-12. There's a link there to our website that details those key instructional strategies. So those are number talks, 3 reads, and participation quizzes. These are strategies that we have identified as being really meaningful opportunities to support kids with building those skills around academic discussion while also deepening their math learning. So we really feel like these strategies are in line with our vision for how we would like our students to grow as math scholars. And then there are the instructional routines provided in IM. So earlier I showed you a slide with those math language routines. There's also additional instructional routines like which one doesn't belong and notice and wonder. And we really ask that you take advantage of those routines as they show up in the curriculum or as you're finding other opportunities to weave those in. We just feel like those have been really meaningful ways to bring students into instruction, bring them into the discussion, and really encourages more equitable participation. And we also ask that you administer district assessments. So we are still developing our district assessment calendar for next year. And the hope with district assessments is that just gives us some data that you can use and schools can use to really make sense of where are students now, how are we doing in terms of pacing our instruction so that we are hitting on all of the major work of our course by the end of the school year, and the way that we are able to utilize digital platforms for showing data reports could be really helpful for teachers and for schools as you're making use of that data. So what you'll notice that is not included on this list is an expectation that teachers are teaching every single lesson within a unit. Like I said earlier, we really trust teachers as professionals, and we want you to bring your own style, your own flair into instruction. We just ask that if you are supplementing because you're finding that students need an extra day of practice, or if you want to bring in a project that you really love from your previous work, that those are just aligned with the unit learning goals. We really feel that if we are staying focused on those unit learning goals within a course, that we're really setting kids up well for success in future math courses. Of course, to go alongside a new curriculum implementation, we want to provide you with ongoing professional learning opportunities. So we are presenting our proposal to the board on May 13th. And so on that date, we anticipate that they will approve the adoption of IM for Algebra 1 Geometry and Algebra 2. And so once the board approves our proposal, we will go ahead and confirm our professional learning dates for May and June. So in lieu of a in-person large institute, since we are still in some scary times right now, we are offering these as virtual sessions. So these will all be 1-hour virtual sessions, and you can see that there are multiple opportunities to choose which time works best for you. I recommend that math teachers attend all 5 parts of the training. But of course, according to your schedule and your needs, if there's just 1 or 2 sessions that really feel relevant for you in your practice, particularly if you are supporting students through a special ed setting or in a different way, please feel free to opt into the sessions that make most sense for you. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and pause again to give you a chance to write any questions in the chat box, and then we will move into our Q&A discussion.
So Courtney, I'm seeing a few questions. I think the only one relevant for this section before some of the other questions we can answer in the general Q&A with other pilot teachers. Will the district benchmark follow the IM pacing guide?
Yes, yes, it will. And I know that's been a concern for teachers in previous years, because curriculum usage across our high schools was so varied. It was just so challenging to think of a district benchmark that really served every teacher's needs, right? So I think one of the benefits of having common curriculum for these 3 courses is that we'll be able to really provide benchmarks that are hopefully more relevant and meaningful for teachers, aligned to what you're teaching.
And then I'm seeing another question that I think is relevant for this section. So by unit learning goals to align our work, do we find those in every lesson by analyzing the assessments in the unit or in a unit guide?
All of the above. Each unit has a pretty rich unit narrative that details the key learning for that unit. Also, every lesson, the teacher notes for each lesson start with, again, a narrative of the key learning for that lesson, as well as the standards that that lesson aligns to. And then in our teaching practice, we always recommend, as you're backwards planning your unit, starting with the assessment so that you can backwards plan from that. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and transition into our Q&A discussion. I'm going to pass it off to Joey.
So for this part, there are pilot teachers who are in the room with us. So if you're a pilot teacher, feel free to jump in if a question comes up or you want to speak about your experience in the classroom piloting IM. So the first one might go back to something that Shane had talked about, but for the block schedules, the presumption here, it sounded like Shane might have been implying that one lesson would go through a single block. And so this person was asking, for the block schedule, did you only get through 3 lessons per week? So if you're seeing students every other day, was it like 3 lessons per week? And if so, how did you manage the pacing? And that could be open to anyone who is piloting, perhaps with a block schedule.
I can jump in just to start the conversation. Skyline, we have a modified block, so I see my students 4 times a week. One of those days is 90 minutes. The other 3 are 51 minutes. And so what I did is I tried to look at the lesson series and figure out what were the key parts to each lesson series and what were the key activities. And then how can I build that into my weekly unit? Mostly it was a lesson a day during the regular days, and then the block period is where I had opportunity to kind of jump around a little bit more in that lesson series, and really give me time to assess my students' learning.
And I'll also say, as somebody who piloted at Fremont, similarly, in a given unit, there are occasionally some lessons that are considered optional according to IM, as well as some activities, to give you some guidance about if there are particular points that are maybe a little bit beyond the standard of what you need to hit. But I think that I definitely was struggling with pacing myself, but know that once we're piloting as a full school, that's where the collaborative planning is going to come in, about making those intentional choices as a team of what lessons or what activities are really important to build to the understanding at the end of the unit. And I should have clarified, I'm also on a modified schedule, a modified block schedule like Shane. So hitting about somewhere on the order of 3 to 4 lessons a week.
I also piloted the curriculum, the Algebra 2, and we met with the other Algebra 2 teachers. We wanted to cover 2 lessons a day, but that was impossible. We could easily cover 1, but then again, it depends on the concept. You might end up needing more than 1 day for a certain lesson, and so that was a good experience.
Any other pilot teachers want to talk about piloting on either a regular schedule or a block schedule and pacing? Okay. There's another question I brought up earlier about how well does it translate to distance learning? So how well does IM translate to distance learning? Maybe Courtney or Mary might make sense for one of you to answer first, like what resources are available for IM through distance learning, and then if other folks have used it, they could speak to that.
Great. Making eyes with Courtney to figure out which one of us is answering. So IM has recently come out with some resources to help with distance learning, given where everyone is at right now. So they created like a sample activity planner for teachers to help them figure out which parts of a lesson might be helpful to do over like an instructional video, what parts might be helpful for students to actually collaborate with over a Zoom call, and then which parts would be okay to be done independently. And they've created a spreadsheet for the second half of the year with that guidance for each lesson. And I imagine they're doing that for the fall, given that we don't know what the fall will look like yet. And I think hearing from teachers across the district that have been piloting, I know that they appreciated just having the workbook with students during this distance learning time. But Courtney, anything to add, or those of you that piloted and are continued to use IM during distance learning?
To share briefly, I dropped into the chat box the IM distance learning resources link, so you can click in there and check out some of the things that they've created. And like I shared earlier, the materials are really easy to integrate into Google Classroom. So I know a lot of teachers are utilizing Google Classroom to assign work. But I think our pilot teachers would be the best to answer this question.
So I'll just say briefly for myself, since I piloted it and students already had workbooks, when schools closed, I'd see that Fernando's asking, do they have access to workbooks? So for students that were there on that day when school closures were announced, I told my students to take their workbooks home so they're able to continue working out of their workbooks. And as was already said, otherwise for kids who are accessing through Google Classroom, I have the assignments posted there that I want them to use in IM. And then it's just a matter of me making formative assessments to collect student work to see how well they're doing in their understanding. So I have been using it, and since they can access it either through their workbooks or electronically, I think it can be adapted to distance learning, and it just depends on how you choose to use it.
I think some pilot teachers have taken the curriculum and transformed it into a Desmos activity. So those that were really fluid with creating Desmos activities found it pretty easy to go from the IM curriculum to a Desmos activity, distance learning. For me, I was just creating videos for my students based off of the IM worksheets. Similar to Joey, my students were able to take the books home before the distance learning break, and those that didn't, I was able to attach the PDF or Word doc to my assignment so they could at least look at it while they were watching the videos.
Any other pilot teachers want to comment?
Can I just, sorry, one more thing. I'm going to link into the group chat our secondary math Google Classroom code. I know many of you are already on there, but we are adding resources every week from teachers around our district and sharing videos and lesson ideas from the classroom. And so at the end of this week, we hope to be posting some more examples of how some of our teachers are taking the IM lessons and teaching them through a distance learning platform. So sharing that code for you in the chat box.
So I think that there are two more questions here, again, open to anyone who has experience with IM to share. Are the lessons designed to take the same number of minutes?
Yes, they are. They're designed for a 50-minute block. But we know that curriculum is not one size fits all, right? So when curriculum writers create the lessons, they're not necessarily thinking of our students in mind, right? So as you're doing your planning, definitely make sense of where might you want to shorten an activity and stretch another activity to better fit the needs of your students? Where might it be appropriate to cut an activity completely so you can spend more time with another one? Or when might you be able to just utilize the lesson pacing recommended in the teacher notes?
And then there's another question here about how flexible the curriculum is for opportunities to differentiate. So thinking about students with IEPs, students with unfinished learning, and it's not stated there, but I would assume also our language learners, English language learners.
I'm hoping actually one of our pilot teachers can jump in here.
I think I like the warm-ups that they have, and they have different activities. Like I want the students to just make observations about different things, and without asking them to solve a big problem. So it was like, what do you notice? What do you wonder? So I think that's very accessible for students to say something, and also to just to hear from their peers.
I'll also add that I think the pace of the curriculum allows for students to have a deeper understanding, and that includes all students. It doesn't jump into a difficult concept right away. It kind of uses student intuition and human intuition to build up to that conceptual understanding.
And I think earlier in this orientation, Courtney mentioned that there are sort of call outs in the lessons about opportunities for using principles of universal design for your students with IEPs or other learning disabilities. So those are sort of scattered throughout lessons where it seems appropriate to be able to provide some sort of accommodation or modification to a lesson. I will say from my experience, I didn't find those super helpful, but I think that that's possibly because I didn't take enough opportunities to actually work with it in the curriculum yet. But they are there definitely to provide guidance for whether to use them or not in your instruction. And then I think Courtney also mentioned the math language routines for language learners, which was really helpful for me. Like those were very intentionally placed in certain activities to give students more opportunities to talk about, critique, reason through, discuss their ideas of their mathematics that are related to a specific activity. So those were super helpful. There's a question about the pacing guide and whether it's been released. Yes, there is a pacing guide. Courtney, could you drop it in the chat box?
Yep, I just did.
And then there's another question regarding student feedback. What is there a way for us to access a summary of the student feedback? Is that linked in the slides, Courtney, or no?
No, I think most of our student feedback tended to be anecdotal from our pilot teachers. So what teachers brought into our monthly spaces and shared. So unfortunately, I don't have something like a spreadsheet or something put together with all of the student feedback on there.
Can any of the pilot teachers speak to how students either appreciated or did not appreciate the curriculum?
Yeah, I can say something to that. A lot of students appreciated the matching activities where they had the equations and the graphs. I thought they would be like really challenging, and students easily give up. But during those activities, I noticed that they were very engaged, and And they actually ended up getting the matches correctly, most of them.
Yeah, I think the biggest appreciation for my students was just having that workbook, especially in color. Students love pages in color. And just the ability to catch up if they were absent, or read the lesson summary and go back and try the problems. And just kind of have everything in one place was really, really helpful for organizing my students, and they appreciated that.
Great, thank you. Joey, are there any other questions, or do we feel ready to transition to our closing?
I don't see any other questions. We're good.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you, Joey, for leading us through that. And thank you to our pilot teachers for sharing your experience. I think you all can answer a lot of these questions much better than Mary or I could. So thank you so much. So if you continue to have questions, please feel free to reach out to Mary or myself, and or to one of the teachers on this call. We are here for you. As we think about next steps, please consider signing up for one of the May or June curriculum trainings so that you can learn more. Those May dates are already available, and I believe everyone who signed up via our Google form already signed up for curriculum training, and so you should already have that Zoom link. But if you didn't get a chance to sign up for it, please go back to that Google form link, or you can email one of us and we will add you to the calendar invite. And I already see some appreciations coming through the chat box, so thanks for anticipating our team math tradition. So please feel free to appreciate each other in the chat box. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.